4 days before the water came down Buffalo Creek, dam number 3 was found satisfactory. That word is the hinge of this story, not because the dam was safe, because the record had learned how to call danger acceptable. This is not a story about a dam that suddenly failed. It is a story about a record that ran out of honest words before the dam ran out of strength. On Saturday morning, February 26, 1972, a coal waste impoundment failed in Logan County, West Virginia. The water did not come alone. It carried coal, slurry, sludge, mine refuse, trees, cars, houses, and pieces of the valley itself. It moved through the hollow for roughly 17 miles. It struck Saunders first, then Pardee, Laredo, Creneco, Lundale, Stowe, Kreitz, Latrobe, Robinette, Amherstdale, Becko, Fanco, Brayholme, Acoville, Crown, and Kistler. By the time the wave reached Man, the official numbers were almost too large for a narrow creek valley. 125 dead in the later count. More than 1,000 injured. More than 4,000 people without homes. But the central question is not only how a dam broke, it is how a pile of coal waste became a dam in the first place, how warnings gathered around it for years, and how, 4 days before failure, a reassuring word could still appear beside it. The map is small enough to understand quickly. Middle Fork was a side hollow above Buffalo Creek. Buffalo Creek ran through a chain of coal communities, then met the Guyandotte River at the town of Man. The valley was narrow. The official commission described floodplains only a few hundred feet wide in places, pressed between steep slopes. People lived where the creek allowed them to live, on the strips of land that coal camps, roads, rails, and houses could occupy. Above them, in Middle Fork, mining waste had been dumped for years. At first, the waste bank was part of the ordinary geography of coal. Rock, shale, coal refuse, and black water from washing operations had to go somewhere. The company put it in the hollow. Over time, the refuse did something more dangerous than occupy space. It blocked drainage. It created pools. It became an impoundment. That is the first transformation in this episode. Waste became structure, structure became permission, and permission became a word on paper. The official report did not describe dam number 3 as a carefully engineered earth dam. It described construction by dumping coal waste across the valley, grading it, and allowing the pile to grow. Trees in the construction path were covered. Vegetation in the pool area was not cleared. Sludge remained beneath the dam. Later drilling indicated deep sludge deposits under dam number 3. The dam was not built on a clean foundation. It was built on the remains of earlier waste and water. That matters because a dam is not only a wall. A dam is a promise about what the ground, the water, the spillway, the slopes, and the people responsible for them will do under stress. At Buffalo Creek, the promise was made from refuse. There had been warning signs before 1972. A West Virginia University timeline records earlier coal refuse failures in the region and at Pittston-related sites. It also notes that, years before Buffalo Creek, a federal publication had discouraged using burning refuse dumps as dams. In 1966, after Aberfan in Wales, a similar coal waste collapse killed 147 people. That disaster should have made every coal waste pile above a village look different. But warning does not become protection by existing. Someone has to act on it. At Buffalo Creek, the warnings became paperwork. In 1971, the downstream face of dam number 3 slumped. Witnesses later described black water boiling into the pool below, an indication the official report connected to foundation displacement or piping. The pool behind the dam was not full at that time. The danger was not that a rare storm had already overwhelmed the structure. The danger was that the structure had already shown how it might fail. The West Virginia Department of Natural Resources had also found deficiencies. Inspection reports over several years were described as unsatisfactory. One recurring concern was the lack of an emergency spillway or overflow system for the upper impoundment. A spillway is not decoration. It is the route by which water is allowed to escape without choosing its own route through the dam. The company installed a 24-inch pipe and called it an emergency spillway. ASDSO later summarized the installation as largely inadequate and with little or no engineering involvement. The governor's commission report discussed probable seepage around the pipe because of improper installation. So the dam had three problems that should never have lived together. It had a weak waste-based foundation, it had a history of visible distress, and it had poor capacity to pass water safely when rain came. This is where the story stops being a weather story. Rain was part of the trigger. It was not the whole explanation. Between February 24th and February 26th, rain fell over Logan County. The National Academies later cited 3.7 inches measured in the area during that period. Water rose behind dam number 3. The company and local residents watched the pool. Some accounts describe the water rising by inches per hour. The danger was not hidden in a technical archive. It was visible in a valley where everyone understood gravity. On February 22nd, 4 days before the failure, a federal mine inspector and a Buffalo Mining Company safety engineer found dam number 3 satisfactory. The title of this episode rests there. Satisfactory did not mean engineered. Satisfactory did not mean safe for the people below. That word meant that, in the available regulatory language of that moment, danger could still pass through the inspection frame. A dam could be evaluated as a facility while the people below were treated as scenery. I am willing to argue that the most important failure in the record is not the moment the dam face gave way. It is the earlier moment when a refuse pile with known deficiencies could still be translated into an acceptable condition. That is not a claim about one inspector alone. It is a claim about a system of responsibility spread thin enough that every part of it could point somewhere else. The mine operator controlled the waste pile. State inspectors found problems. Federal mine safety law existed, but coal waste impoundments did not yet have the kind of standards the disaster would force into national discussion. Corporate managers understood that refuse dams could create risk. Residents lived below the result. When responsibility is divided that way, danger can become strangely weightless. Until the water moves. In the early hours of February 26th, people in the valley worried about the dam. WVU Law's timeline states that by about 1:30 a.m., water was only about a foot below the crest, and that company reassurance discouraged broader warning. ASDSO's case study records that the on-site vice president visited the dam repeatedly and continued to insist there was no need to fear. Other people were less sure. Denny Gibson, a heavy equipment operator at the dam, made several visits that morning. ASDSO records that he warned several residents about the possibility of failure with his last visit about 10 minutes before the dam failed. That is one of the human anchors of the warning chain. Not a speech, not a dramatic scene. A worker on the ground reading the water more honestly than the paperwork had done 4 days earlier. That contrast matters. The stamp saw a condition, Gibson saw a consequence. Just before 8 a.m., dam number 3 failed. The exact mechanics remained technical and partly uncertain. The governor's commission and later engineering summaries point toward foundation weakness, sliding, saturation, internal erosion, and inadequate water control. The Corps of Engineers report for the Senate concluded that dam number 3 should never have been built, and that uncontrolled seepage and sliding were probably central to the collapse. The safest way to say it is this: the record does not need a single perfect trigger to explain Buffalo Creek. It has enough evidence of a dam built wrong, maintained wrong, inspected too weakly, and loaded by water it was not prepared to handle. When dam number 3 gave way, the release was enormous. The governor's commission calculated 17.6 million cubic feet of water and sludge, about 132 million gallons. That mass dropped from Middle Fork toward Buffalo Creek. It washed out the lower impoundments, tore into the burning refuse bank, and entered the valley below. The flood was not a clean wall of river water. It was black water mixed with sludge and mine refuse. Sources describe the height of the wave differently depending on location and method. The governor's commission described a 10 to 20-foot wave moving down the valley. ASDSO's later summary describes a 20 to 30-foot wave. The difference is not a contradiction that changes the story. It is a reminder that a moving flood does not have one height. It rises and falls with terrain, debris, bends, bridges, houses, and measurement. At Saunders, near the mouth of Middle Fork, the valley had almost no time. The official report lists 18 deaths at Saunders. Among the named dead were Janice Juanita Osborne Bailey and 4 Bailey children. The list gives names, ages, and family relationships. It does not give us permission to invent their final moments. It gives us something more sober, a record of who was placed below a hazard they did not create. Downstream, Lundale suffered the largest recorded loss, with 52 deaths listed by community in the Governor's Commission report. Laredo had 21. Other towns lost fewer people, but no town received a smaller disaster. Houses were destroyed or damaged. Roads, rail lines, bridges, power, water, and telephone lines failed. The valley's physical connections were cut at the same time its families were torn apart. This is what the map shows better than any sentence. The disaster moved through a narrow place built around coal. The railroad was there because of coal. The camps were there because of coal. The refuse pile was there because of coal. And when the pile failed, the same narrow geography that had made the valley useful to industry made escape brutally limited. The midpoint turn is not the collapse. The midpoint turn is what investigators found afterward. Because if the flood had been only a freak act of weather, the investigation would have looked for rain, volume, and bad luck. Instead, the record kept returning to construction, inspection, spillways, and corporate responsibility. The Corps of Engineers in a Senate committee print said the designs, construction, and operation of the dams were unsatisfactory. It said that if refuse piles are built across valleys containing streams, without adequate spillways or other measures for high-volume flow, they will eventually fail. That word is important, eventually. Not mysteriously, not impossibly, eventually. The Governor's Commission used even sharper institutional language. It concluded that Pittston had shown flagrant disregard for the safety of residents of Buffalo Creek and other people living near coal refuse impoundments. Pittston, for its part, attributed the disaster to heavy rains and called it an act of God. The Commission found no evidence for that. I read that gap as the moral center of the record. The company tried to place the flood outside human responsibility, while the engineering evidence kept pulling it back into human decisions. The legal aftermath moved through courts, settlements, state claims, and public anger. Hundreds of survivors and victims' families sued. WVU law records that the plaintiffs in Pittston settled in 1974 for $13.5 million. West Virginia brought its own suit. Congress passed the National Dam Inspection Act in 1972, and Buffalo Creek became part of the national argument over dam safety and coal waste impoundments. But policy change does not restore a hollow. It changes what the next owner, the next inspector, and the next regulator can call acceptable. That is why the word has to return carefully, not endlessly. Put it on screen as a stamp, then put beside it the 1971 slump, then the unsatisfactory inspection history, then the missing emergency spillway, then the 24-inch pipe, then the rain, then the communities below. The point is not that one word caused the flood. The point is that the word shows how institutions sometimes record risk at the wrong scale. A pipe can be installed and named a spillway, while the valley still has no real protection. A warning can enter a file and never enter the homes downstream. This was not merely a dam failure, it was a definition failure. The company had a waste disposal problem and turned a hollow into the solution. Regulators had warning signs and turned them into notices. The inspection record had a dangerous structure and still allowed a reassuring word. By the morning of February 26th, the valley was living beneath all three decisions. The exact first movement inside dam number 3 can be debated by engineers. The larger chain is not nearly as mysterious. A coal waste pile blocked a stream. The pile impounded water. The pile showed distress. The spillway protection was inadequate. Rain raised the pool. The people below were not moved out of the path. Therefore, when the dam failed, the flood did not have to find a disaster. It was already aimed at one. There is one more reason Buffalo Creek still matters as a documentary subject. It is not forgotten in West Virginia. It is not forgotten by the families who live there. It is not forgotten by dam safety professionals. But for a national audience, it is often reduced to a few numbers and a black wall of water. That reduction misses the harder story. The horror was visible in the wave. The accountability was visible in the paperwork. The Governor's Commission had hearings, witnesses, technical studies, casualty lists, and damage estimates. The core report had laboratory tests, field observations, and engineering conclusions. WVU's legal timeline shows how the disaster continued through lawsuits, insurance, corporate filings, and settlement pressure. Those documents do not make the story colder, they make it harder to dismiss. Because a natural flood can be remembered as bad luck. A coal waste dam approved 4 days before collapse has to be read as a choice about what counted as safety. In the final analysis, Buffalo Creek did not begin just before 8 a.m. on February 26, 1972. It began when mine waste was allowed to become a dam above a living valley. It continued when visible distress became maintenance instead of evacuation. It hardened when inspection language made room for reassurance, where engineering had left room for failure. The record's afterlife is not only the law that followed, it is the vocabulary that followed. After Buffalo Creek, coal waste impoundments could no longer be treated as background terrain with water behind them. They had to be treated as structures with consequences. That is the part a title can only hint at. The dam they called satisfactory did not fail because language broke. It failed because language had been allowed to stand in for safety,